two, one. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Inside Movies Galore. I'm your host David Strom, and today we are going to start discussing kaiju monster films. If I remember correctly, that's what we called it. Correct?
Kaiju combat.
Yeah, get the name right, Dave.
Well, in any case, the film that we are going to be going on about first is the first film that ever hit the U.S. in 1956, and it is a heavily edited version of the original 1954 film Gojira, otherwise known as Godzilla. And it stars Raymond Burr, but it is headed and directed by Ashiro Honda and Terry Morse. So let me just do a small synopsis here of the film, and then we'll get our first impressions here. So 400-foot, 122-meter dinosaur-like beast awakens from undersea hibernation off the Japanese coast by atomic bomb testing and attacks Tokyo. So, I'm gonna go with first impressions of Forrest. Now, was this a first-time watch for you, or?
I've seen the original Gojira like about maybe 2-3 times.
Okay. Well, this is Godzilla, King of the Monsters.
Okay. Oh, King of the Monsters. My second time seeing. Okay, so this is my second. Okay, so as far as King of the Monsters, this was actually my second time seeing this one.
Okay. And what were your first initial impressions of it, and what were your impressions of it now?
My impressions of it, I would say that all the American footage kind of just threw me out of it compared to the first one. It felt like a completely different movie. It just felt like a completely different movie. Like I was watching a different movie. You know, until Godzilla's on screen. It's kind of, I don't know. It's like that weird effect of like what, how if you watch Power Rangers as an adult and you notice like the Japanese footage is so like different from the American footage. It just feels like you can tell it's like two different narratives that seem inconsistent.
Okay.
It is very different because it's basically assembled from what you could call the highlight reel of Gojira, and there's new footage spliced in, and the narration's overdubbed, and it's very patchwork kind of thing.
Exactly.
So it doesn't exactly have the best flow. Like a lot of it, at least to me, feels kind of awkward in how the movie progresses.
When were you introduced to the Americanized version?
Oh, I was probably too little to remember it, honestly. Because I used to watch Godzilla movies on TNT, like Joe Bob Briggs' Monster Vision with my dad. And that was our thing that we would do together. And that was when we would get along instead of horribly fight. So Godzilla's always had like a special place for me. But kind of being older and having more perspective on it, like the first Godzilla, like the Americanized Godzilla, really, I don't really like it so much. There are definitely better Godzilla movies out there. As insofar as, well, I have to make it clear that I'm referring to Godzilla King of the Monsters 1956, whereas the original Gojira is a very like tight, coherent film, which is, a classic, and arguably I think it makes the best serious attempt to use Godzilla for serious storytelling. Godzilla 2014 comes pretty close, as does, I think, the new King of the Monsters from 2019. Although that one's focused a lot more on like kaiju combat, which makes it perfect for this month.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I think most of that movie is just kaiju combat.
Moving over to Mo here for a moment.
Sure.
What was your first introduction to Godzilla, King of Monsters?
Oh, probably very similar to Dustin's. I know I rented this one. Yeah, pretty much. And it was, obviously definitely this version of the movie. And you'd see it on TV sometimes, or I would rent it, I think I went Godzilla versus Mothra more often than anything as a kid. I still love Mothra for some reason.
I have a thing for Rodan.
Rodan's another favorite of mine. I don't know. That movie, his standalone, is just amazing.
Yeah, Rodan really holds up on its own, like especially with as a horror movie.
Indeed,
Rodan is frightening in that movie.
For sure.
And this time around, how did it fare?
I thought it was fucking hilarious, dude. Like, for some reason, I just could not stop laughing every time there was Raymond Burr shit, especially the ones where they're like, it's like he's really there, and they just have him like peeking over Asian people in the background and stuff.
He's like behind a bush, or it's like, I am coming to you live from the scene. It's like,
some of it's
no,
just
you're not.
pointless too. Like, they just have him reacting to stuff, like the scene where they show the footprints into the sea, and he's just like, look at the size of those. Unneeded, but he has some pretty fantastic eyebrows. I really liked the shots of the principal characters from the Japanese one, how they would shoot people that vaguely looked like him from the back of their head, so it would seem like he was talking to him. All that was great. So I had fun with it for sure.
Okay. Going over to you, Brandon. What was your first impression of this film, and was this a first time watch?
No, it was not. I was introduced to this long before I was introduced to the original, as many people were, I guess. Mm-hmm. And I had an old VHS tape of it. Mine, though, I never really paid much attention to it until high school, when I was really into Mystery Science Theater. So what me and a couple of my friends did is we actually had a video camera, and we had a Mystery Science Theater style show we did, created copies of the tapes and sold them for a small profit, which I'm glad that none of those are probably still out there. But Godzilla was one of those, and that was probably the first time I would consider myself really watching the film, because I was so used to all of the other ones, like Godzilla versus Megalon, a lot of the later ones that came about, and how silly they were, and a lot of the kind of general fun that was around. I wasn't as prepared, even though this one was a little bit sillier. It was still a lot more serious if you compare it to those films. I mean, Godzilla's child dancing around. And one of the things, when I watched it this time, I noticed a couple of things that I didn't notice back then. When I was watching it this time around, I was a little bit more into it, as far as like, I think my mind was a lot more focused on what was going on, and sort of like how he was just the character of Steve Martin, which we used to make fun of, was in the background of most of the, just like as Mo said, just kind of shoehorned into the background. But I also gained something else from this, which was kind of an appreciation, because this movie, yes, it was terrible. It was kind of a hack job in some cases, but without this version of the film, I doubt that Godzilla would have had the foothold it has today, or at least some of these, or even things like Power Rangers would not have come about, because this is a pioneer in those ways. So it kind of opened my eyes in that, because really and truly, Gojira would have poked a niche portion of the public, because subtitles. Few theaters at the times actually showed films with subtitles, and most Americans at the time said, subtitles, I gotta read? So this actually made Japan kind of there, and I've got more on that for later. But I do feel like this is an important film getting made this way for those reasons. So I've got an appreciation. I don't love the film, but I do have an appreciation for this version of the film for that reason. I mean, that's why we have our buddy sitting here with me today.
Yeah.
Dave, why don't you tell us a little bit about your first experience with this particular American version of the film? And,
Well, at the time that I would have seen it, I was a little kid and I saw it at Blockbuster. And keep in mind that at that time, again, Blockbuster's access to anything that was older than brand spanking new was rather limited. And so the fact that they had, any degree of something, that was relatively old, that was a miracle in and of itself. But also, for Godzilla fans, American ones, it was a good long time, I think, well into the DVD era, that any of us stood a chance at getting to watch any of the original subtitled, non-butchered versions of the films, because yeah, the versions that we got, they were just not up to par with the originals. But I did see this one as a kid. I remembered seeing it maybe once or twice when I was a kid, because even then I could tell that the having to have English translations for some bystander, while there's mostly Japanese that's unsubtitled, that's spoken, I could even tell back then that that was clunky. So it wasn't one that I watched a whole lot. And plus, like, I'll argue that no matter which version you're talking about, I think the first installment in this series is definitely treated in a more serious fashion, and it's not quite the kaiju slugfest that we come to know the series for nowadays. And for whatever reason, back in the day, I think that Godzilla versus Megalon was more accessible. And I guess that because if you saw the James and Mike Monday. It wasn't James and Mike Mondays, but it was like a special Cinemassacre thing where they did reviews of VHS public domain cover art. And for whatever reason, there were a ton of different VHS art designs for Godzilla versus Megalon, despite the fact that I don't think it was ever in the public domain that I know of. But
I remember my VHS tape had them like standing on top of the World Trade Center towers, like shooting fire at each other.
Yeah, that's a very famous cover for it, despite the fact that in real life they would be much taller than the building. So, it didn't make any sense. But obviously, I'm sure trying to cash in on the 1976 remake of King Kong. But, it's just point is that for whatever legal reason, it may or may not have been either public domain or more accessible, but that's the one that I have the most fond memories of. And I would argue that that one is perhaps a little bit more kid friendly because of Jet Jaguar and because of the overall tone of it. But this one,
didn't it come out around when Ultraman was becoming a thing?
Yeah, well, I think Ultraman had already been out by the time that it came around, but it was definitely cashing in on the craze, that's for sure. And so that's the one that I remember more fondly. But even as a kid, I remembered that the device of hearing a lot of unsubtitled Japanese and then having to wait to have someone explain to you what was said, I could even tell at that time that was pretty clunky. But I just enjoyed anything Godzilla at the time. But I will say again, I don't think that for kids, I don't think it's necessarily the one that they're going to enjoy the most. But I think that, if you're serious about the genre, you need to at least appreciate what it did for introducing Americans to this concept, even though it's nowhere near as good as the original Japanese version, because it feels very much like a kind of, you're put at a distance from everything because it has that stranger in a strange land feel to it. and so you're put at a distance, just like Steve Martin is, and so you can't really ever get to know the characters that well, and you're just kind of like he is. You're just kind of observing these things happening, and in a weird way, it feels like this is going to be a weird comparison, but it feels a little bit like two different things. It feels a little bit like an Ed Wood movie in the sense that these different unrelated things are being spliced together to make something new. But then on the other hand, it feels a little bit like, at best, it feels a lot like something like Lost, or any of those like stories where you see an event play out one way and then you go back in time and you see the same event played out from someone else's perspective, almost like that person was there all along, but we're just seeing it from their point of view, and that's more of like a generous way of looking at it. But you almost wonder, like, well, was he there the whole time in the Japanese one and we just didn't see him?
I like to think he was,
When I
Yeah,
was
that's just kind of a general way of
That's a new way to think about it.
when
Yeah.
I
I
was
hadn't considered that.
when I was a kid, the fun thing about the Godzilla movies on VHS is that first you had the words, you heard the words, and then their lips were moving like later. So half the time when you were trying to watch the movie, the words were moving faster than the lips, and the lips were just going, and you were like, huh?
The dubbing was quite
Yeah.
poor, but
Well-
when you're a kid, you don't pay attention to the
Oh
dubbing.
you
yeah,
know
well,
why that is.
dubbing.
Yeah, they recorded that without even knowing what they were recording for. In many cases, they weren't played the video; they were just told read the script, and then they tried just to match the
Yeah.
sound, the voices. They didn't really have it. They weren't really dubbing it, Morse.
Well, and here's an interesting thing about movie dubbing. So we're talking about Japanese film being dubbed into English, and that I guess like you said, they were doing that kind of in a vacuum, which is never a good idea if you want to get that to match in any real way. And that's different than, say, in Italy, where they knew for a fact that it was going to be overdubbed, and they had like that whole side industry for dub actors to dub over whatever the dialogue was for whatever market they needed. And so they could get actors from anywhere to speak their native language on set, and then they would dub over it later. And I'm just thinking, well, that's got to be horrible to act against, because you don't know what your scene partner is saying, unless you've read the script and you know their lines as well. But it's just, that seems kind of weird to me. But dubbing it's kind of a lost art when it comes to live action, and just as well, because again, unless you're talking about like a home video release, like a DVD, where you can choose to have it on or off like that. But and the only way that I can think of that it's really still kept alive is in dubbing anime into English, and even then they run into all kinds of trouble where they have to, not only do they have to translate it, but they have to time each line to match up with a certain number of flaps in the mouth movements, and there's like a whole formula to it, and even that has gotten to be a lot more disciplined than what it once was, which was a lot more in a vacuum, like it would have been in the old days. But it's just such a bizarre idea, I think, and that's why to this day I don't really bother with dubs. I try to, unless it's anime, but even then, it's like sometimes it's just good to hear things in their native language.
Dave, we cut you off. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Keep going.
Well, I was introduced to Godzilla, obviously, either on TNT or something like that, Godzilla King of the Monsters. And I remember watching Perry Mason like in the mornings, like with like my dad or whatnot. So when I saw Raymond Burr was on this thing, I could deal more accepting of this movie when I was a kid. I mean, I think when you're young, you just don't really care. But as you grow older and you realize, okay, I guess there is a different version of Godzilla, and then when you see the other film, you're like, how the hell did they make this film? You know, and things of that nature. So, to me, I was introduced to this first, so I'm used to this version. So seeing the added parts was a little different of the other earlier film. I mean, you have to understand that version of the film did not come out until like the 80s. So at least to the United States. For 30 years, it was kept strictly in Japan.
I feel like I read too. Then even then in the 80s, it was like a laser disc thing, or so. It wasn't widely available even then to everyone, like Gojira.
Well, James Rolfe talked all about how
when you guys call this that other one, the Gojira, a classic, I'm looking at this one as a classic. So.
I mean, technically, it is.
It is in its own right.
It's just not as good.
Yeah.
Honestly.
To me, it's more.
I have a massive poster of. I have a massive poster of this version of the movie that I've had since I was a kid. I mean, so it clearly, left its mark on the world and me as a kid. But like, the James Rolfe talked about how being a Godzilla fan in the 80s and 90s was not really easy for an American because not a lot of people were really into it in like any kind of large numbers. And I mean, technically, they're still kind of not. I mean, everyone knows what Godzilla is, but like the actual Godzilla fans are going to be a lot more. Yeah, well, they're going to be a lot more massive in Japan and in the mainstream than it is here. But then also for a lot of the 90s Godzilla films, the only way that you could watch them was in the VHS era was through a special import from Japan. And so, James Rolfe showed off a lot of his original like Japanese VHS tapes for a lot of the 90s ones. And, it was quite difficult to see the films in their original intended glory. And I guess you could say the same thing with anime too. Like there were a few things that came over, but it was really Dragon Ball Z, Sailor Moon, and especially Pokemon that helped open the floodgates wide open to where in the decades that followed that Americans could finally enjoy these things as they were intended and fully uncut and everything. And so it's just it's crazy to think how the fandom for these things is still relatively recent as far as its truest form. But you have to give it up for some of these initial ways of getting those first generations exposed to Godzilla.
Oh,
for sure.
Let's actually talk about why that is. I mean, if you think about it, and I love this. Most of the stuff you can get from the Criterion release, which most of us here have.
Pretty great set.
But that was something really cool that I found out. Like before then, Rashomon was the one film that most people recognized from Japan. And Japan was looking for that cultural identity, something to identify them to the world that's not their past and not as a bad guy, which is all they were really viewed at the time, because World War II had its mark on the world. And Godzilla.
Look no further than the wartime comics from DC and Marvel for evidence of that, and of course the Bugs Bunny cartoons.
Startling racism as well.
But when it got to the box office, when it hit the box offices, it scored higher than almost all of the foreign films that had hit the United States before that time. It hit big. It way outdid Rashomon. And it was way bigger than most of them. It was in the top 4 best foreign films of all time in the United States, monetarily. It showed that, yes, a foreign film can make money in the United States if you're willing to make some sacrifices. But that's the thing. That's what that made this film very special. If they had released it as Gojira, I think no doubt it would still have had an impact. but it would not have had the level of impact.
It'd
It
be
would not
closer to like Rashomon, you know, where it's like people that are into foreign films are about it, you know.
Also,
or
And it
like,
stays highly
or you would have
influential
felt,
too.
yeah, you would have felt the influence in other things like, you know, the Hidden Fortress obviously was heavily
And Star Wars,
influential for
yeah.
Star Wars, and but at that time, you know, a lot of films from Japan or from France or Italy or whatever, that would have been more of a niche thing, and so the influence would have only really been felt by people that would have been exposed to film from other parts of the world. And obviously George Lucas, Spielberg, Scorsese, you know, they were at a time and place where they had access to those kinds of things that most people didn't. Obviously, pre-internet and all that stuff, but that's how you felt the influence of the Hidden Fortress.
before we get into the plot thing, let's look at the reason why Godzilla it has even been created. The monster itself was created from the fear of the atomic bomb, which was in fact on August 6th and 9th of 1945. We sent a couple of bombs to Hiroshima and Nagasaki and pretty much devastated, you know, Japan with those bombs. And their fear and their answer to those bombs was Gojira. So
yeah, well, the United States is the only country that has ever used nuclear weapons in wartime, and
Well, I think Japan's the only one to ever like take them too. You know what I mean? Like, so they're uniquely qualified to do like atomic.
and why the United States gets kind of itchy politically whenever nuclear warheads comes up.
Well, the movie wouldn't have been allowed to be shown during the occupation. The only reason why the movie was able to be shown is that the U.S. occupation in Japan had ended just like a few years earlier.
yeah. Well, I mean, you can really see, well, in this film and even as recently as Shin Godzilla, you can still see the reverberations of that, you know, horrific event of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. You could still feel those reverberations all these years later because there are still, you know, the historical ball just keeps on bouncing. And it takes a long time for those reverberations to stop being felt.
Yep. Well, plot time?
Yep, the plot. The plot is basically the H-bomb testing has been
A dinosaur has been mutated by atomic bomb testing in the Pacific, and it comes ashore and goes on a rampage.
Actually, no, the best plot description is a U.S. reporter is observing a monster attack on Japan.
And does a lot of talking.
Yes.
Some rich aromatic pipe tobacco too, I bet. He looks like he smells good. like your grandpa's study or something. I don't know. Yeah, that's pretty much what's going down, you know. I think he sinks some ships at the beginning. I don't know if we get too much of that. See, I watched these back to back. So there's certain elements of it where it's like, is that in King of the Monsters, or is that me just remembering bits
I
from
watched them
here?
back to back too.
I watched this back myself last night.
Yeah, it's you know, they try a couple of things to stop them there. You got the whole electric fence bit, which is like an iconic Godzilla clip. And then they do the oxygen destroyer in this one too, yeah.
Which, I mean, that was a pretty neat idea for a weapon. I mean, that almost strikes me as something that you might have seen on Star Trek or something, except this predated Star Trek. But it's they're definitely thinking along those kinds of lines as far as something that's beyond the usual. Well, we'll just nuke him, or we'll just do X, Y, and Z. I mean, well, you think about like that compared to something like Armageddon, where it's literally just put a nuclear bomb into a massive asteroid, and it would have to be more powerful than any bomb that we've ever tested or used or anything in order for that to happen. But with an oxygen destroyer, it's like, well, that's a little bit more off the beaten path, and so props for that.
Yeah, it's a good idea for sure.
Yeah.
It's meant to be an example of overly destructive weapons, it's meant to be kind of the next thing after the atomic bomb, because it's trying to make a point with the oxygen destroyer that these kinds of weapons are unethical.
Yeah.
Well, or in the U.S. version, it's more of these weapons are unethical if they fall into the wrong hands.
Correct.
That is a very important point for this version.
It's an important distinction, yeah.
Well, but
And
Gojira, they
the other
said
end
that
of it.
too. They said that in Gojira as well.
And Gojira was implied that no one should have this.
Yeah, that's
As a
why
weapon.
Sarah thought,
Or
or
in the
whatever.
American version, it was implied, the righteous people with the red, white, and blue maybe might be use this as a right.
Well, I mean, I think that okay, important distinction. So I remember the scientist in the original version. He was saying that if he could find a good application for it, then he would announce it tomorrow. But I guess that's more what I was getting at when I was watching the original version. I was like, is there really a non-destructive application of this technology? I can't think of one, but
I don't know, removing bad algae blooms or something like that. Theoretically,
maybe.
it could
In
be.
Godzilla versus Destroyer, they were researching something called micro-oxygen, which I think is a product of the oxygen destroyer, and that guy seems to have plenty of ideas for good uses for it.
Okay. Well, I mean, I'm not saying that it couldn't. I mean, that's
Because
what.
there's that line, I discovered a mysterious destructive form of energy, and I think he's referring to what they would call micro-oxygen in Godzilla versus Destroyer 40 years later.
Yeah, and I mean, hey, I mean, nuclear power. That's using something destructive to generate electricity. I mean, so I'm sure it could be possible, but it's just an interesting food for thought there. But I thought.
I really like the concept of the oxygen destroyer, and then what they did making that the origin of Destroyer, like taking Godzilla's origin, but with a different, like much more violent and destructive weapon, and just kind of showing what that creature is like. Like I really love everything about what they did with the concept.
Well, that's a good way to, especially because Godzilla versus Destroyer, that was supposed to be the last one, and it was for a little while. And so whenever you do that, it's always neat to kind of bookend it, go back to the start for the origin of the, main character, and, find a different way to, spin it around. And, it's, I've always kind of felt like on that, there's a lot of good parallels with that film and with like Superman and the death of Superman with Doomsday and everything, because I've always kind of felt like Godzilla in its own weird way is sort of like Japan's Superman, in terms of like this very powerful entity that also has a lot of heavy associations with their country and with their culture, that can be a force of destruction but can also be a force for good. And it tends to evolve with the times. And so, I think that's an interesting comparison and an interesting confluence of events there, because those both kind of happened at around the same time.
Now, one thing to save for time is definitely I'm making at the bit to discuss more of the Gojira comparisons. We should definitely save as much of that for our second one as we can.
Correct.
Yeah.
Or else we'll have a lot less to talk about. This is.
We could just make it a combo episode.
I mean, that's what I was thinking, because I mean, it's the same movie. It's just
vastly different.
Well, kind of. I mean, it's two different takes on essentially the same story. That's where I brought up the two different perspectives thing, because in a lot of ways it feels like you're watching, because Lost and other shows like that with these massive casts, they would do that all the time, where they would take some central event and then they would show the same event but from a different perspective, as if that character was there all along and we just didn't see him or her there.
Yeah, he was pretty easy to miss. I mean, actually, though, one of the things that I find interesting about the plot here is, again, they took a risk on this, and we look at this as cheap. But really and truly, it would have been much cheaper for them to slap the subtitles on it and throw it out. They actually had to spend money on this.
They did.
And that's something worth noting, is that they did spend money. They did have to create new scenes for this.
Yeah, dude.
However cheesy as they are. Actually, though, that scene where you see him in the rubble and messed up there, that was actually a pretty elaborate scene that they created for him.
Yeah.
Well, dude, and I mean, there's that moment during the typhoon when they're whipping Raymond Burr in the face with like wind and water and shit, and you can see the look on his face, like, oh man, we're in this. Like, we're really making a movie here.
Oh yeah.
I don't think you knew until that moment,
Well, and I mean, I made the comparison to Ed Wood, and that's only really in the sense of things getting cut together that didn't previously go together. And I mean, even in Gojira, even then you see like what's obviously stock footage of the Japanese Navy, which was common for movies for a long time. I mean, even up to like the 70s when they made, World War II films, they would splice in real footage from the war that was shot, and makes sense, because I mean, save money where you can, but it just it did remind me a bit of Ed Wood, because his stuff would be compiled from all over the places.
3, 4, 5 times in a film, then it gets kind of redundant.
Yeah.
Only so many times that we can.
I mean, I mean, the matching between, like, if it's like in that scene where they have like whatever that is, the town council or whatever, and you see him in the background, that matches up better than I've seen other things match up. Like it doesn't do like
I just can't not laugh at it, man. It's just so funny when he shows up.
It doesn't do like it doesn't change from day to night magically or anything like that. So
right.
it could have been a lot worse in that regard, but
Well, and when Godzilla's actually attacking the city and Raymond Burr's like up there in the high rise reporting it and all that shit, like they did a good job of matching that up with the flames flickering on his face and stuff. I did appreciate that this time around.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
That was in the city of Otaku, correct? Before it hit Tokyo or whatnot.
I'm not sure.
It was in one of the cities. I think that one of the salutes that they did with the boat at the beginning, well, again, more on Gojira, but I think that's supposed to represent the lucky dragon. Which, more on that later. But that concept where it starts. Yeah. But it's the stock footage. They did not do like some movies that do claim their own. Like, say, let's look at Mega Shark versus Giant Octopus. How many times do we have to
a cinematic masterpiece?
Just like zooming by that same thing each time. Like they were really proud they put it together.
I know that was just glorious.
There was some octopus movie I saw where they used the explosion from Jaws 3D and like a big pair of shark jaws flies out.
I'm about that. I need to see that immediately.
Yeah. It's either Octopus. I think it might be Octopus 2, River of Fear.
My rule of thumb, like when I'm grading stock footage in a movie, is I can totally understand.
A good movie.
I can totally understand when you're using stock footage where it's like, ooh, that's so nice, I'm gonna use it twice, But when you do it more than twice, it's gonna be obvious right away to anyone watching, and then it starts to feel real bad.
Well, what made me think of Ed Wood with it was not even just the splicing together, but it was also the what you do often when you have to kind of cobble together a narrative that maybe doesn't necessarily flow naturally from what was actually shot. What you do is, whether it's footage you did shoot or whether it's stock footage you could find or whatever, the way that you stitch those things together is through voiceover, and that's really that's like the glue that's holding this thing together, is the telling us what's happening instead of letting it flow organically as a story, which is why. Well, that's why even back when I was a kid, let alone now, I thought that it was clunky. So there's a good reason for why it is clunky.
Mm-hmm. I really did feel like this was more of a narrative story, even then, like more of a documentary instead of instead of an actual film, because you see more action in much more of the Godzilla films after this. This is like more of a introduction to Godzilla.
More audiences.
Correct.
Yeah.
And Raymond Burr at the time, he was kind of a big figure at the time too. I mean, with his Perry Mason episodes and whatnot, this had to be like mid Perry Mason at least, because I've seen him a little bit younger and he's not as stocky, but in the shoulders or whatnot.
Well, part of that's that ill-fitting jacket. I was going to bring that up earlier. I mean, you got to pay tribute to that thing.
Yeah. Well, that was like I think maybe a few years later he was in Rear Window, and he was the bad guy there, which is pretty cool. But
there's just no way that jacket in the second half of the movie wasn't just chucked at him like he forgot his, and they're like, here you go, Raymond. They just tossed it to him right before he started shooting.
Or if he was like Christopher Walken, his wardrobe would consist all of the movie wardrobe that he just stole, because that's what Christopher Walken does. He just takes the wardrobe and that's what he wears for his clothes, since he's such a cheap ass, I guess. But I think with this film, like, it does have that attempt at almost like a documentary remove, but it also has that stranger in a strange land kind of feel, because he's clearly out of his element, and what he's seeing around him has to be explained to him, and it just feels very foreign and everything, because, well, it is. And keep in mind, this was also still very much in the era of that we weren't far removed from, obviously, like the wartime Disney films, and just after the war, I'm thinking of things like the Three Caballeros and Saludos Amigos and things like that, which were basically travelogues that were there to try and appease the South American countries to say, hey, we're your friends, please don't turn communist and want to kill us. That was basically what that was all about. So we weren't far removed from just the idea of movies, like narrative films, as travelogues, and so in a way you've still got that kind of as a backbone for this, but it also does put you away from what was a very human story in the original version.
Forrest, what do you think about the plot of this particular version of the film? Do you think that it holds up over time?
I do not think so. It just feels like for me, it just feels like a totally different film. A totally different film from the original Japanese version. It doesn't work. It doesn't work for me.
Okay.
Especially compared to like the first one. The first one was, especially like compared to the first one, which was just. I rewatching the first one like last night this morning. There's that sense of like paranoia, and or that shit's getting serious. Like I was saying, I don't know. I just feel like actually rewatching the original Gojira. It seems more relevant now. It seems more relevant now in the wake of this pandemic, with that that sense of like there's that paranoia of
it's coming.
Yeah.
Well, it's relevant to any era in history in which there is inescapable, impending, existential, and physical doom. And that can apply for the atomic age. It can apply for disease, or Shin Godzilla, it was the hurricanes and the earthquakes, or the typhoons and the earthquakes that they had recently, or just before the film came out. But there are always going to be those forces of nature and those things that we can't control that bear down upon us when we least want them to. And we're going through that right now. And I think that, well, that was a big theme in the 50s in cinema anyway, whether or not it was aliens from outer space or whether it was, of like the classic variety of the flying saucers, or if it was like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, where your neighbor could be one of them. And of course, metaphor for the Red Scare there. But, there's always going to be something existential that's a threat to us that we can't control or quite understand. So, that's a universal theme.
Okay. Now, where are we at plot? Did we talk about some of the ships that ended up floundering during this whole?
Well, Godzilla sinks a couple ships, but it's kind of.
Yeah.
I don't think they really occur. I don't think it really occurs in the same place it does in Gojira.
No.
They kind of
and there's not much put into it either. The family's freaking out.
Really, the whole first part is more spent on trying to explain the narrative with this character and just give a basic overview.
Yeah.
It really isn't, and they just kind of show those others as sort of a basic. It's not until they get to the island that you really get to see Godzilla back in the mainframe again.
Well, they're trying to justify his existence for being there, as opposed to, in Gojira, when the ships sink and all that, that's obviously the first warning sign, and there's a good reason for it. It's because 1998 Godzilla actually got something right relative to this to Gojira, which is that Gojira, Godzilla's primary diet is the fish of the sea. And so, like, when they have that famous, that's a lot of fish, that bit in 1998 Godzilla, that's actually correct. And as to what his diet would be. And they make that more clear in Gojira that, that's what his diet is. And then you got these fishing ships that are out there when he's, eating all the fish in his immediate environment, then he's going to come onto the land and eat people. And that's why they had to sacrifice a virgin, because of course they did. That's just what you do when you've got, some big existential threat that you can't stop. Okay, who's a virgin? We got to sacrifice somebody. It's like, that's clearly that's just what you do. Everyone knows that. It's just, I think that's an interesting kind of point of synchronicity between, the butchered 1998 Godzilla, retroactively called Zilla, that monster, and then the original Gojira.
Yeah. Let's see. And then we're introduced to the professor.
Professor Serizawa.
Correct. And he has found a trilobite in the mountains. Which
no, that's the other professor. I don't remember his name.
His name, I believe, was Yamane, Dr. Yamane, who was played by Takashi Shimura.
Yes, correct.
So
Yamane.
So the Kanbei from
we are introduced to him and his daughter Amiko. And Amiko goes and talks to Serizawa and sees what he's up to, and he tells her his secret, which he tells her not to tell anyone else. And once she shows her, she is shocked, and it's like it doesn't register in her, at least until she sees the devastation that Godzilla has caused. And finally, she tells her man, that I finally have to come clean. I know Dr. Surawa's secret. I can't keep it anymore. He's got this. He's got this thing, and I don't know what to do. So.
Well, she agreed to keep the oxygen destroyer a secret because of the implications of what it existing has for the world. And then
screaming.
Yeah, and when all weapons failed against Godzilla, it was kind of the only option they had to try to save lives.
And I think that's part of my problem with this particular dub, is because there was no emotion shown in Emiko when she was telling Raymond Burr's character instead of telling her boyfriend.
Like he's really
not to compare the two movies.
You know, one thing I really wish that they could have done, and maybe somebody has done this already, is they need to like do a new dub with the Doctor voiced by Harrison Ford as Indiana Jones, and when he's talking about he wants to save Godzilla, it's like he belongs in a museum.
I could see that, and then redub Raymond Burr's character with Jack Nicholson's voice. There we go.
Yeah, I want to know who played the back of people's heads in this. Are they credited? Like,
probably not.
There was those stand-ins, you know, and they ruined it both times too by having whoever's playing the stand-in turn their head, so you saw the side of their face, and it's like, yeah, that's not the dude, obviously, but it's even more obvious now. The one guy didn't even have similar hair. It's amazing. Someone signed off on that. I love it.
Did anybody notice there's a character who dies twice?
I did.
No, but
I don't remember who, but the way scenes are chopped and reorganized, like somebody dies in Godzilla's island attack, and then he's alive in a later scene.
Uh-oh.
And they just thought American audiences wouldn't be able to like pick him out because he was foreign.
Well, we didn't.
It's actually very fucked up.
So after she finds out, or actually she tells the secret, then they both go to the Dr. Surazawa. It's hard to say his name. But they go to him, and he's got one patch on his eye, so he looks like a pirate. Actually, I think he looks kind of cool, debonair almost. But in any case, as soon as he is the thing is mentioned, he's like, "What are you talking about?" You know, he's trying to keep it hush, but when he learns that Emiko has spilled beans, he almost immediately gets in a fight with Dude, and I think it's due to him looking at, or actually not in this particular version.
Yeah, there's more to that tension, and
there's more to that tension in the original film. But he immediately says, "Okay, I'm in." And then they both go down diving, and then you get more narration, and yeah. So, what do you guys think about those scenes there? Do you think that they're relative scenes? What do they tell you guys?
I think, you know, it gets expanded on more obviously in Gojira. It all works pretty good. I think the main problem with this movie is the being more removed from it with the Raymond Burr stuff takes away that sort of very like tangible fear and paranoia that others have mentioned tonight. You know, like there's scenes where Godzilla's doing shit and he's like hangs out well after people run away and he's just like, you know. I think a lot of it is just, you know, yes, the pacing of the movie might be quicker in some respects, but yeah, it's got a lot of problems if there's dudes dying twice, and it's just, I don't know, you're not as connected to the people in this version of it, so that whole end sequence doesn't have the same, you know, punch that it does in Gojira.
No, I don't think so.
Well,
I mean,
what was the best? And what was the best scene in Gojira? It was the choir of girls that you saw that great shot, where they're moving past row after row of them, and they're basically pleading for their lives.
You see some of it in this film, but not the entirety of that scene. So,
Well, it that's what I mean. It's like in the original, like it has such weight, and you can just feel the fact that they're like, our lives are over, and we got no other options here. We're begging for, whatever higher power, whatever, just, we have no other choice here, and we got no hope. And when
Yeah,
you
that's
just saw a little bit of that you saw that with the one mom who's like, we'll be with dad soon. And I was like, oh man, that hits pretty hard.
yeah.
Alrighty.
They took a lot of the fire out of it in this one by softening the edges on some of that stuff.
Oh yeah, for sure. So does anyone want to talk about the special effects in this film?
I do want to say again, I'll shout out to the scene where he is actually buried in the rubble. I'm not going to worry about the special effects for Gojira because we're going to talk about Gojira next. And besides, none of those special effects had anything to do with this movie other than how they spliced in the American scenes next to those special effects they already had. And I guess that was okay. I mean, it kind of looked like he was there. You weren't paying attention.
Well, it wasn't like say, Lord of the Rings or whatever, where you had like forced perspective shots next to like, Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli there, and then you have like green screened hobbits, so that way you could appropriately shrink them down and place them there in the scene, even though they weren't actually standing next to each other. And it's like, well, long before that, so best case scenario, you just splice together footage where, okay, it kind of sort of looks like that person's really there, kind of.
Yeah, I definitely would give the nod again to the whole typhoon scene where they're whipping his ass with the water and the wind, and he was in the mix there for sure, and I don't think he knew that he signed on for that.
No.
And then that scene, however they were doing those flames flickering on his face, I would imagine with real flames, why not? That whole scene was pretty good actually. I'd say in terms of tension in King of the Monsters, that part where he's reporting and he's like sweating like a motherfucker and he's like genuinely looks scared at that, during that whole city attack. That's probably the best. That's like the peak of the performance in this, I think, of Raymond Burr there.
I'd agree.
Yeah,
I'd agree.
which I mean, he does a good job. He does a good job with what he's got. I mean, I don't think it's not his fault at all. I mean, I think he actually, as far like if you had this and you just overdubbed it, and or you just there are other ways you could have done this relative to what they did do at the time. There are other ways you could have done it and it wouldn't have worked, but just like obviously I would have liked just the original version presented as it was, but what else could they have done? They could have put someone else there. They could have just remade the whole thing with American actors. They could have done any number of things, and it's like, well, relative to the kind of role that he had, relative to the fact that he's basically having to shoulder the burden of this movie onto American audiences that had no real concept of this stuff outside of maybe like a giant ant movie like Them or something. Like that's all that they had. So I mean, for him, he's really carrying this movie, and I think doing a pretty good job of it relative to what he had to work with.
And speaking of Them, there were only two other films like that at the time that were like mainstream. Was Them, and I think it was The Creature from 20,000 Leagues or something like that.
The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms.
Yeah, that was it. So, giant monster movies were being made in the U.S., but they made Godzilla for much cheaper than they made other movies for.
Oh yeah.
I like to think that Raymond Burr had a lot of fun doing this and looked at it at least as some part of his legacy, because he was down to reprise the role like 30 years later in Godzilla 85. So
yeah,
True.
He was a big advocate for it, wasn't he?
I think so. Yeah, it's which is neat. It's I can't think of anyone else from any other like spliced in American bits and kaiju movies that's about it like that.
Yeah, well, I mean, the only other kind of thing like that leaps to mind is like the just because the Cinema Snob covered it pretty extensively in his early days, that it was the Godfrey Ho movies that starred Pierre Kirby. These were these films that were from like Hong Kong or whatever that were cut together with new footage shot by Godfrey Ho with Pierre Kirby as the white lead, and they were spliced together and they had virtually nothing to do with each other, but his splicing of those things, they had some fans of their own, but obviously Godzilla, even in its Americanized kind of truncated forms, they did have a niche audience in the United States, and obviously enough to where Raymond Burr would want to come back, I'm sure.
Yeah, indeed.
So let's talk about favorite scenes.
Raymond Burr getting whipped with that water in the wind. That's my vote.
Did you have a favorite scene of this film, Forrest, out of all of it? Or
Oh god! This is so my reasoning for this is so stupid, but I don't know. It's okay. There's a scene where like Godzilla's peeking his head over a mountain, and people first find his footprints. Oh god! I don't know. Just seeing Godzilla in that scene reminds me of my parents' pug. I don't know.
Yeah, I have always reflected fondly on the fact that technically the first time we ever got to see Godzilla, he was looking derpy as shit, dude. That hand puppet that they used was a bad idea, and they never really used too many of them again, for good reason, because no one needs to see that shit.
It's funny because in Shin Godzilla they made fun of the which I remember when I saw that version of Godzilla in Shin Godzilla where his neck was like dragging on the ground and things like that because he hadn't really fully developed his backbone quite yet. Right. Like I remember people made fun of the googly eyes.
I was going hard on it at the time.
Yep.
What's funny is I remembered seeing that and I thought, I thought it was really creepy because like just these massive, wide open, unblinking eyes, but then I watched this, both versions of it, and it's like, well, the googly eyes were there, they were there first, so
I have to say the hospital scene with all the wreckage, and again, to me, that, and of course the storm scene, it showed that this was a little bit more than some versions of just basic redubbing. It was a lazy redub. I'm sorry, it really was. But what they did with the American acting was not as lazy, and that surprised me that it wasn't as lazy. But they did do pretty good with that. I was always I was kind of impressed. I was surprised that I was impressed by it too.
I would have to say my favorite part in this particular film was I don't know why, but the fact this is a little bit after the hand puppets scene where you see for some reason Raymond Burr just keeps on staring intently, like not moving, where everybody else is running the fuck away.
Yeah.
So to me, for some reason, Stone Cold being unaware that he should run the fuck away is.
Yeah, it's great.
Like he was waiting for the director to tell him to leave.
Yeah, I don't know what his motivation was there. He's just like, yeah, that's a fine dinosaur. I don't know.
That's a fine dinosaur right there. Imagine if you did the same kind of thing, but instead of Raymond Burr, it was somebody like Slim Pickens, or like the modern equivalent would be like Larry the Cable Guy or something.
Like a fake Texas accent or something.
Well, boys, I reckon this is it. Nuclear combat toe-to-toe with the Ruskies. I can only imagine that movie in my head.
Oh, my.
What about your favorite scene in here, Dustin, if there was one?
I think probably Raymond Burr during the Tokyo attack as a whole, and Raymond Burr's scenes during the Tokyo attack because he is just so dutifully, giving the play-by-play.
Yeah, if I was being serious, that'd be. I'd agree.
Yeah.
It's like, here it comes.
His
Oh
performance
my gosh,
definitely.
I'm still here.
And I do think that him doing
Yeah,
that,
his
was another way of-
performance.
yeah. I really do think they were trying to take the place of the powerful performance that they did with the I think Tokyo Tower or whatever they were at, which again, that'll be more for later. But that was a powerful performance there, and I do think they were trying to mimic that.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's really where his acting gets to shine. So as far as like a serious moment for this version, that would definitely be it. As far as like something kind of amusing, I think anytime that there's a character that was in the original version that is talking to him in a dubbed voice that is not
Yes.
even close to what you would imagine their real voice would be like if they could speak English. And the fact that you only see them from behind, and it's like, then they have to cut into some really horrifically dubbed attempt at trying to make the audience believe that this person can speak English when there is no reason why they would be able to speak English. Because like it was a little bit odd in Shin Godzilla that there were characters that, like, there were some that you were like, okay, I can understand why that person can speak English, but then other times you're like, why are they speaking English here when they don't really need to? But like that was nothing compared to this, where like there is no fucking way that in the 50s, only 10 years after the war ended, that these people would be fluent in English. Like, right.
Dude, what'll really throw you is when you hit that odd Gamera movie where there's like little white kids speaking fluent Japanese and his parents too. Like,
Well, I mean, there are well, if you watch like if you've ever watched MXC, which was again an American redubbed comedic version of Takeshi's Castle, you do see every now and again you see a white person who I assume is probably like either an off-duty, soldier on like a military base, or maybe the kid of someone that was stationed there or something.
Those army brats.
Yeah, and in which case, then yeah, they would have a good reason to speak Japanese and everything. But
yeah, it's neat. It's just it'll throw you for a loop for sure because you're used to him being crappily dubbed, and it's like, no, he's really speaking it.
Yeah.
Alrighty.
I think I watched the entire Showa Godzilla set from Criterion. Actually, on Friday, I took a day off from the gym and I watched. I'm trying to count how many of them I think I watched 8 Godzilla movies on Friday.
Oh wow!
Well, I watched between last night and today. I watched Megalon myself, so that's quite a lot.
It was really jarring in some, like especially like Godzilla versus Kong, how there was actually. I'm going to agree with the point that it's like sometimes there actually is English dialogue that's part of the original mix, and it's
right
jarring.
It's got those vertical subtitles sometimes. That always trips me out.
I actually like the way the Japanese do subtitles. It's just kind of like off on the side, and it looks like very cinematic.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
It is interesting though in comparison. So like when I saw Shin Godzilla on the big screen with that, it was like a 2-night event. You had your choice of original Japanese with subtitles or dubbed, because obviously there are some people who have nostalgia for the dubbing. I saw the original Japanese, but what's funny about that was, again, you did see the disconnect between the mostly Japanese language that was there, but then you would hear English sentences sprinkled in there every now and again. And then there were actually scenes there that were taking place in like the Oval Office of the United States, of the White House. And I was like, it's obviously like Americans speaking English, but the ways that they are speaking, the ways that they're saying it, the way the English words are coming out of their mouth, it sounds like obviously they're being directed by people who English isn't their language. And so, and it's like, that's so weird to hear that, because I can understand the words. That's not it. It's just they're saying it in such a way that they're almost like, is that the way you want me to say it? Yes, keep going. And it's like, oh, okay, that's kind of how they look.
Nothing is funnier than watching an anime where they have obvious Japanese voice actors trying to play American characters speaking English when it's obvious that those Japanese voice actors have a very poor mastery of the language themselves. Where you're sitting there and wondering, can I have the English subtitles for this part as well?
Yeah. Or like my favorite is when you're watching something like G Gundam and you have cannot remember the character's name, but whenever in anime, whenever they have characters that are like explicitly American in there, and it's just funny to see like their versions of us and how it's always like the character is like decked out in red, white, and blue, and they love baseball. They love, which I think per capita, I think the Japanese are actually bigger baseball fans than even we are.
They are.
Yeah, but it's funny that like that's like how they view us, and it's not like, oh, I'm offended or whatever. I think it's hilarious.
Now that I think about it, you're probably right, because
as far as like the per capita thing, yeah, I know, because like
I've seen Case Closed. I know how things work over there.
Oh, it's huge.
Well,
yeah, minor league baseball, like there's, it's almost cultish, the local involvement and your city team type stuff,
Oh yeah, and it's quite something. Because like every like anime or every fighting game that I remembered growing up, like they did have some kind of baseball connection, and yeah, I just, obviously the populations are different, but it's just so weird that in America that is baseball is popularly known as America's pastime, but I think it's right to assume to say that it's been supplanted by football and
basketball.
Well, and for a while there, it was NASCAR. Basketball had its time in the sun, but I think for most of it, it's football. But it's like, baseball for so long was America's pastime, but nowadays it's like in Japan, it's like so much bigger than it is here.
Alrighty. I think we're going to save most of the rest of the subjects that we normally talk about for the Gojira talk. So let's talk about a little bit. Let's do our outros, and then we'll end this discussion. And we're going to do our second discussion in Skype, so that we can add Jake to the discussion. Because I believe we can add more people to that, and so stay tuned for a link for that after that. This will give y'all a 5-minute break. So, in any case, Forrest, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and maybe what you call your blog and all that jazz. We kind of saved this end for a little bit of shout out.
Okay, but about myself. Let's see. Where do I begin? Well, I'm based in Long Island, New York.
Okay.
And I have a blog. My vlog. It's just my name. My vlog. My YouTube channel. It's just my name. Forrest B. Bennett.
Okay.
My blog. It's on Blogger. It's called Video Store Paradiso.
Okay.
I haven't updated it in months, but I think the last thing I reviewed on there was Saturday the 14th.
Okay. Cool.
Which was not which I did not particularly care for.
And
I'm also a small time indie producer. Also a first time indie film producer.
Okay.
On a slasher flick called Camp Murder.
Okay, very cool. Going over to you, Mo. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, unless you wanted to save it for.
Mine's simple this week. I ain't done shit. So my name's Mosley. I did have a pickup video. That's right. Thank you, Brandon. I've got some pickups from Amazon and Walmart that I showed off recently. Got a Dollar Tree one that I'll probably edit tonight after this. I do videos for Drunken Master Studios. I just pretty much drink and watch movies, you know. If you want to come over there and check out some reviews, I've got some recently for Absurd and other movies. I think Absurd was my last review.
Awesome. Dustin, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I'm a movie collector and student here in Milwaukee. My channel is The Crypt of Horrors. I was supposed to have a video go live last week, but I didn't get to it. So I've got some videos going live this week. I just show off what I find around town and elsewhere and try to have a good time with it. So when I was more ambitious, I was thinking of doing stuff like reviews, but I keep not having time for that. But who knows? We'll see what this semester brings.
I'm still waiting for that bad CGI Sharks review.
I am too, which is why I'm pushing for it to be part of our lineup next month.
Alrighty. Dane, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do, and then Brandon.
Well, I'll do the short version. Dane Kyle, I'm aka Dane Damarung on YouTube, filmmaker and host of Indie Horror Film Creatives. That's the YouTube channel. The show that I do on there called Blu-ray Views, where I do unboxings as I was trying to rebuild my Blu-ray collection. I'm moving this Saturday, so I already filmed the last one that I could really do in this location because I gotta get the new place set up, and so yeah, stay tuned for that.
Alrighty, cool. Brandon.
Well, yeah, I'm Septum Send versus the World. Unfortunately, StreamYard's limitations on their not costly version has kept us from allowing our co-host on for this one.
Sorry, Jake.
But we do movies. We like reviews, pickups, and all things physical media. But the main thing I want to make sure I shout out is I did promise several of these groups that have been voting and keeping us up with an actual group of people that can help us decide what to cover for the month. So I want to shout out these groups at the end of these episodes. Animazing Collections Inc., which Facebook group that is one of our biggest participators, and I'm glad that they are here. Hopefully y'all are watching and hear this shout out well. Movie Collectors, Mo's Tavern, we always get a number of those. Thanks again, Mo, for that group there. And Talk Movies with Us, all groups that participate in our voting. And I'm always looking for Facebook groups that love to participate in these types of votes. So if y'all have anything or any group that I should be putting polls in, let me know.
Awesome. And my name is David Streggy. I am one of the founding fathers of Inside Movies Galore. I also, where we go on about various films from generation to generation. Hopefully you've enjoyed our discussions so far. I certainly have, and thank you for coming with us on this journey and listening. So, but I also moonlight under a different channel called Delusions of Grandeur, where I have fun uploading videos of collections, collecting videos and whatnot, and going on about certain films that I've either been asked for or been interested in. So definitely check out some of those. My latest reviews have still been some of the Alfred Hitchcock movies that are out there because I just recently got the Velvet Masterpiece collection. So, but in any case, like, share, and subscribe, and come and join us on our next discussion, which unfortunately it won't be live, but it will be uploaded some time later tonight, and we'll be up there for you, the original Gojira. So, thank you for listening. Have a great day, evening, or morning, wherever you are, and thanks for watching us start our Kaiju Combat Month. So, thank you. Enjoy.